Now we go to local board input, and this relates to agenda item 11, and that relates to the Waiheke area plan, the allocation of non-regulatory decision making to the Waiheke local board. And we have chair of the Waiheke local board, Kath Handley, with us. And welcome, Kath.
Kia ora, Chair. Kia ora koutou. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to item 11. This is I think the third time, but the second for the the first time for the Planning Committee, where the Waiheke Local Board is seeking a delegation of authority from this committee to approve the Waiheke area plan ourselves. There is precedent for this. It is part of an exploration for us all of the opportunities which you have sought under the governance pilot. So Waiheke Local Board is a pilot for seeing really or for seeking to strengthen the opportunities for local decision making through the local board. And in this instance, just as for Matiatia, which you delegated as a governing body approval for the Waiheke Local Board to be the governing entity for the Matiatia redevelopment, that has meant we've been deeply involved in what was always a complex and intransigent issue, and it has been moved along, I have to say, significantly with Ngāti Pawa, but and I would say also that with this area plan, we would be looking to work with mana whenua and Matawaka and significantly Ngāti Pawa, but their issues are as yet unresolved with respect to mandates. So we work with two trusts for Ngāti Pawa, and that at the moment is actually significantly delaying matters, but that's as an aside. The Waiheke area plan's been in the making, including major public consultation now for over 18 months. The planning, the area plan committee is made up of the local board, plus the councillor for our ward, Councillor Papakoom, plus, and I acknowledge Leanne Namani here, thank you, who is appointed by the Independent Māori Statutory Board. So it is up to that committee now to review all of the feedback, and it's extensive, into our draft area plan, and then to finalise that. And normally that would be brought then to the Planning Committee for sign-off, governance sign-off. So that is what we're seeking. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Kath. Any questions of Kath, members? And Councillor Cooper, please.
Thanks, Kath. Member Handley. So why is it important for you to sign it off yourself rather than just come through the normal channels?
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor. It's because we are answerable to the local community who are the ones who've had the input into this. And what we'd like to do is hold that accountability locally, and also for them to see that it's held locally. This area plan, which is a 30-year vision, does have a significant influence over when the Hauraki Gulf Islands District Plan is transitioned across to the unitary plan. It will also inform decisions in the interim and after that, which are not affected by the unitary plan. So it's very much owned right now by those people who are residents or ratepayers on the island, and those who have significant vested interests, namely mana whenua. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper and Kath, for that reply. Well, thank you, Kath. You'll be here. Member Namani, please.
Kia ora. Just one question, I guess, because I haven't been connected to the conversation and the government pilot per se. Where do you see the role of the Independent Māori Statutory Board from this point on if council approve the decision making at a local board level? So I'm just trying to, my head, like where do we fit now?
That's a very good question, because at the moment, what hasn't happened in local board areas, but which is in our current local board plan, is to now look at agreements with mana whenua and to be building governance and co-governance opportunities. So that isn't part of the current structure. Albeit the commitments are there, and it's there in the area plan as well. I would think that we would look to you as our advisor internally to see how that should play out. And I know that our board are deeply respectful and, in fact, seeking as much assurance and involvement with Māori as possible. So I'd leave that with you, Leanne, to advise us. I'm sorry, that's a bit of a cop-out, but it is the way it should be, I believe.
Yeah, no,
Thank you.
that's fine. I mean, I think I'm just, as the IMSB, we're still just jury out on where our role fits going forward.
Yeah.
Okay,
Ka pai.
thank you. Thank you, Kath. Would somebody like to move an acknowledgement? Councillor Collins. And seconded by Councillor Simpson. Acknowledgement of Kath on behalf of the Wahiki Local Board. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no.
Thank you
Declare
very
that
much
carried.
all, and I will endeavour to stay for the item, but I do have meetings all afternoon, so we'll see how we go. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And we are expecting Councillor Coombe by that time. She's on council business elsewhere at the moment. Thank you, Kath. Right, now we move to item 7, extraordinary items. None have been notified, so that takes us on to item 8. And that's at page 9 on your agenda, and this is the report on options for increasing the stock of housing for older people. And the principal author of this is Panya Elliott. We've also got Antonia Butler, Policy Manager, and Kat Mackey, General Manager of Community and Social Policy, coming to the table, and thank you for your work, staff. We've read your report, and we've got a short presentation. Would you like to introduce your... Well, no, I've done the introductions, unless I got them wrong. Now, Panya, are you going to lead off?
Yes, through the chair. I'll just give a short presentation.
I'd have to bring that mic up a little bit, Panya.
Okay. Well, talofa lava, kia ora koutou. Good morning, everyone. I'll just provide a brief overview of the report. So the first slide is what Council is currently doing, and that's our current work in housing, including housing for older people. And that spans leadership, funding, planning and regulatory services, partnerships with the government, including the Joint Work Programme on Housing and Urban Development and the Auckland Housing Programme, and our forward work programs on homelessness and affordable housing, and Haumaru Housing, which is a partnership delivering 1,452 units of housing stock for older people. And the options presented are either or. I'll just get you to move on. Oh, is it me? Sorry, Duncan. Thank you. Thank you. And just an overview of what others are doing in this space. So Kāinga Ora is government's lead housing provider. And so they're providing, they have 29,740 public houses in Auckland, and in terms of older people, they've got 1,533 older people on the Auckland social housing wait list, and about 847 are aged 55 to 64, and 686 are 65 or over, and a modest increase is forecast over time in those numbers. And they're planning to build an additional 3,200 houses by 2024, with around 670 of those expected to house older people. And they're also looking at investigating different typologies, so accessible or village-style solutions. Community housing providers are also playing a really key role, and they also provide wraparound support for older people, and they're also partnering with government and ourselves and private developers. And Selwyn Foundation and Salvation Army are examples of community housing providers who work in the space for housing for older people. Thanks. So the options presented are either-or options. Option one, the status quo, is what we're doing currently, and that's that work around leadership, policy, funding, partnerships, and including haumāoru housing, and that's the recommended option. And so the key pros and cons are, under status quo, council or haumāoru can sustain the current level of provision and could enable an incremental increase if this is the outcome sought. It can be met within existing budgets, and it's got a lower level of risk than the other options, but the con is there that it doesn't enable a step change in the amount of stock provided if this is the outcome sought. The second option, option two, is investigating how to implement indirect provision, which would be to partner with a community housing provider, and that might be a Māori or Pacific housing provider, or to seek to expand the current partnership with haumāoru housing. The pros there are around that could enable a step change in the amount of stock provided if that's the outcome sought. It could also enable more tailoring of provision for Māori and Pacific people. And it could be, it enables that partnership to draw on IRRS funding from government. And the cons there, it's around the higher cost, so it could be around 50 million capital funding to meet 20% of the demand, and the trade-offs, there would be trade-offs required to find that funding. It's possibly less efficient because it could duplicate kāinga orders role, and there's an increased level of risk to council over and above that of the status quo. Thank you. And option three is investigating how to implement direct provision, and that would be building and operating housing for older people, and that could again enable a step change in the amount of stock provided if that was the outcome sought, and it could enable more tailoring of provision for Māori and Pacific peoples. The cons are there that council wouldn't be able to access the government IRRS funding under this model, and it's a higher cost again in that region of tens of millions, and there'd be trade-offs required to find the funding, and it would be less efficient because it would take time to build and deliver and build that capacity in council, and it's a higher level of risk. So just in summary, the key trade-offs across the options are really the level of impact on the problem relative to cost. So if council is seeking to sustain and incrementally increase housing to address the housing for older people problem, then option one, status quo, could achieve this. If council is seeking a step change to significantly increase housing for older people quickly, then an increased role in provision and significant funding would be required. And a step change could be achieved either through option two, indirect provisions, doing more, or option three, direct provision. Kia ora, thank you.
Thanks for that, Pania. Now, members, there's been an informal group led by Councillor Bartley working with Councillor Casey and Councillor Cooper on this. They've been a sounding board more than a formal working party for both housing for older persons and also on consideration of inclusionary zoning. So I might defer now to Councillor Bartley, and Councillor Bartley, would you be willing to give a brief to the committee members on where your sounding board group got up to, or any information you'd like to share with us?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. On behalf of our working group, we actually really appreciated the work of the officers. This is the kind of work where you feel like you're really trying to make a difference because of the vulnerabilities that are out there in our communities that we see. We were, realistic about the options that are being recommended, which seem conservative, but actually the status quo doesn't mean that we're not doing anything. We are hopeful that we can do more in a leadership space with option 1 in terms of trying to address this issue and also providing for our older people. We think that there may be some scope in terms of the concern that was raised by the seniors panel that they weren't consulted, which officers can speak to, because this isn't the end of this item. It's not a finite stop that everything leads to this report. So perhaps if the committee sees fit that we can continue with this work as a working party. But I'll leave it to Councillor Cooper, Councillor Casey, if there's anything I missed here. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Bartley. Councillors Casey and Cooper, would you like to add?
Just to give you the flavour maybe of the political working party that Joe so very competently chaired, I think the three of us represent the collective political responses around this table. So we had a very free and frank discussion, and there will probably be some votes against this, as you might imagine, but definitely feel that we were really well served by staff, thank you, and that we definitely had a very good debate online.
Thank you, Councillor Casey. Councillor Cooper?
I think the sad thing about this is it comes down to reality, doesn't it? That we haven't got $50 million, and I guess from my point of view it was around let's make sure we're looking after the housing we've got, make it better quality. That was always the main intention. But yeah, I guess the thing is, if we could afford it, it'd be great to increase it. But I do think that my point of view was one of those risks was getting a bit messed up in the Kāinga Ora work. But yeah, I think it's just open to whatever people think. But I just don't want our existing housing getting lost in building new stuff.
If I could
Thank you. And
add,
if I go
Mr.
back to
Chair.
Councillor Bartley again, please.
So I think the committee gets where the debate was happening in our political working group, but also we are looking to see central government, how we get more out of that space. So we were talking about the mayoral task force and what role that plays in having a specifically Auckland focus. So I'm not sure whether we join into that mayoral task force, if it's still going, or we just carry on with ourselves and the officers and the AMSB member that was appointed to our working group.
I'll go to Mayor Goff on the question of the Mayoral Housing Task Force.
Yeah, we had some really impressive people on the Mayoral Housing Task Force, including people that, were chief executives of major construction firms, and they willingly gave their time for the set of specific objectives that we were looking to achieve. But effectively that task force has come to an end. That doesn't mean to say the problem's gone away. The problem's still there, as the working group has recognised. But as I said before, when we were hearing the submissions on inclusionary zoning, I see some real opportunity now to get alongside the Minister of Housing, which is Megan Woods, alongside other local government people to look at the broad question of affordability, which will include our efforts to advocate for the increase in, the size of social housing. Because at one point everybody thought, well, we can do away, well, not everybody thought, some people thought you could do away with social housing, sell off the state houses, sell off the rental houses that council owned, which happened under the bank's mayoralty. I think the mood in the atmosphere is quite different now. I think the mood in the atmosphere is actually there is a section of our population, if we don't intervene socially, will not have the basic right to decent, secure, stable and healthy housing. And the government's on side with that. The opposition at the last election was on side of increasing social housing. So I think what our role now becomes is one of advocacy to ensure that we do get that increase, that it does include community housing providers, and that Auckland gets its fair share of that, and that we look at things like inclusionary zoning as part of the Local Government New Zealand working group. So I don't think reconvening the Merrill Housing Task Force will tell us anything that we don't already know. I think it's about advocacy to central government at this point, for the very reason that you three came to the conclusion this is great to do, but for us it's unaffordable.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Your Worship. I think that really adds to the point of continuing with our political working group, and perhaps we can consider adding you to it, Your Worship, to add some oomph to our advocacy to central government. So, yeah, you can join if you want to.
Thank you, Councillor Bartley.
It needs some gender balance.
Some diversity. Good. Councillor Bartley, Councillor Casey, Councillor Cooper, would you like to move your preferred motion, please? I'd like to put that on the table. Sorry.
Option 2.
Okay, can you think about that? I've had notice of 2 questions in advance. The first was from Councillor Dalton, so I'll take those questions first. They've gone through to the staff members, and the second one was from Councillor Tracy Mulholland, so I'll go to those 2 questions. Okay, I want to go to the Deputy Chair in the first instance, if you don't mind.
I'm happy to move option 1, the officer's recommendation.
I'm moving the A. And, okay, moving the A only, I gather.
Yeah, we can do it.
Do I have a second, please? Do I have a second for the A? Councillor, I'll go to Councillor Cooper as the other working party member. Okay, it's on the floor for debate, but I have 2 questions in advance, as I just mentioned. Councillor Dalton, thank you for your question earlier by email, and I think the staff are aware of that, but would you restate the question,
yes,
please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And I support housing, social housing for the older people. For older people, I'm probably going to need one, and they should be done by the right people who are in that space. My question: can you tell me what our current costs of providing housing for the older people are?
No, I can't tell you directly. We would have to go back and ask Pānuku. I know that you emailed Kevin Ramsey. I think he was in meetings all morning. Has he gotten back to you yet?
No. I'm expecting to hear from Marion Webb, but I did wonder if that information was provided to the sounding board, because I think that decisions need to be informed, and I would have thought that how much it costs us to provide our current hamaru housing through Pānuku would be part of that discussion.
So the status quo is what you currently do now. We were more flagging the costs of if you wanted to do something other than that. So we didn't get all the details of the costs. Finance can give that to you. It's just that Kevin's been unable to get back to you since he received the question. So we don't have the exact numbers. We have provided numbers to the working party on what the increases were for Haumaru in terms of the $20 million loan. So the working party were more interested in how much does it cost to incrementally increase elder housing under the status quo, and we've provided them with that information.
So my next question, Chair, was around increase of the stock, and it's going to be a finance question too. So is Council retaining ownership of the capital asset actually preventing Hamaru from increasing the stock in a more timely fashion? So I'll wait for finance.
And thanks for those questions earlier, and let's get some answers on those. Can we have those answers to Councillor Dalton's questions? And I think if any question is not answered today, and look, I acknowledge the staff are not always furnished with the information. It's not their territory, belongs to Pānuku or finance. We'll get those answers and we will distribute to all the members the answers that you're seeking. Thank you. And then Councillor Tracy Mulholland, are you with us, Councillor Mulholland?
Yes, absolutely.
And Councillor Mulholland, you put your question in advance as well. Can I take your question now, please?
Oh, kia ora, thank you, Chair. I'm getting feedback, so can someone do me mic off? Is that better?
Yeah, you're free to
Great,
proceed.
Sorry, it was getting feedback. So thank you, Chair, for the opportunity. Thank you, staff, for the report. And I just want to acknowledge that Gail Marshall, who is one of the co-chairs of the Seniors Advisory Panel, did give apologies. She was going to be sitting in the audience today, but has now been unable to attend. So I will update her. Just my couple of questions were, Chair, and I want to preface this with I am an absolute advocate for social housing for older people. I do communicate with a number of the older community members and especially those ones in Haumaru, so very supportive of the project in terms of social housing. And I think that in terms of social housing, we do have a role to play and a significant role to play, given I think the some $30 million that was previously approved to be paid out over time to Haumaru for the work that they are undertaking. So I also support in principle some of the methods, for example, the Queenstown Trust for inclusionary zoning. So I think we need to do a bit more work on that in the future. Could I just ask, please, was there sufficient time given to the senior advisory panel members to respond to this report or to feed in? Could I have that as my first question, please, Chair?
Thank you. Got that. And I will go to, it'll be Antonia.
Thank you. Through the chair, we were working on the options for this report right up to the deadline. So at this point, we did not have the opportunity to engage with the advisory panel. However, should the committee decide to progress with option 2 or 3, we could continue with engagement of them when we do further investigation.
Thank you, Chair. I really appreciate the staff's comment and feedback. And I would ask you to just consider we do have a seniors advisory panel and they would love to participate from my understanding of a meeting with the co-chair Gail Marshall. So that's fabulous, thank you. And my second question was Haumaru Housing asked to input to this report or to give their feedback, Chair? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mulholland. Antonia, is that something that you could reply to?
Through the chair, we worked directly with Panuku, who are council's partnership arm with Haumaru, to gather the information. We were unsure if they were going to attend today. They have not, but if there's any further questions, we can direct those through Panuku.
So
Thank you, Chair.
The reply, I think you've heard that. Yes, we do work through Panuku to Haumaru, so that's the channel there which the staff have confirmed.
Thanks, Chair. I'm well aware of that, and I do appreciate that there is a channel, but could we also consider, Chair, and maybe the panel, that Haumaru may have some interesting information and supportive information or information to share that enables us to better make sound decisions for community. Kia ora. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Mulholland. Now, further questions. Member Henare, please.
Kia ora, Chair. Just with regards to option 2, and which is the sort of the do more option. Is there an opportunity to do more in option 1 by including the lower level risk to council that you outlined in your report, in your presentation?
Just generally through the chair, when we looked through the options, we actually found that council is actually doing quite a lot and has a very strong contribution. In terms of the resolution, which is actually to increase housing stock, we found that there's not really options left that don't include additional funding at this point. That's what staff believe, because the status quo already allows incremental increases through haumaru when they can. For example, they increased unit numbers by 40 and in 2019, and they also did over 527 refurbishments to those units. So I suppose staff are saying there's advocacy, which council's already doing. There are partnerships, which Paunuku is already doing. There is direct provision, which Haumaru is already doing. So if you want to change the level of stock you contribute, you're going to have to change the amount of funding provided.
Yeah, I know, I realise, and it's why I want to try and couch it in the way that I'm trying to, which is not put any more costs on the wallet of council. So you're saying that Paunuku has already and is partnership has partnership deals with Māori organisations, Māori housing organisations, iwi, mātāwaka?
Through the chair, we do have, as some of our initiatives, support for Māori housing in our outcomes. So Māori housing grants and guidance and due diligence for Māori organisations to develop housing.
Paunuku is in, however, Paunuku does have a relationship with Ngāti Whātua. They have joint ventures. When they do joint ventures with others, they are doing the 33, 33. So 33% social housing.
So there are,
yes.
I want to get back to what I asked. I mean, I know that.
They are doing partnerships.
So they are doing
with
partnerships
Ngāti Whātua,
with Māori organisations, with mātāwaka, with iwi. Yes or no?
Yes.
Cool, sweet.
Thank you. And now we've got 7 members wanting to ask questions. So if we could please be precise in the questions. Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure if this one is to you. I've got 3 questions. They'll be quick, though. In relation to the Working Party, is that a question I should put to you, Chair, or is that a question for another time?
Feel free to put it to myself, Councillor Bartley, on the Working Party.
Yeah, I guess I'm just wondering if it is worth extending the time that it meets. Councillor Bartley made the comment of extending, perhaps expanding the group, and I'm just wondering if there'll be room for that ongoing discussion, Chair.
I was thinking exactly the same thing, and that's missing in the motions at the moment.
Yeah.
I actually think we need to confirm that. And was that something that you would like to? You would like to see a motion to become a resolution, a direction that carries on?
On the basis there, Chair, that I'm not sure that it's just going to be focused on older people's housing. I think the discussion started to veer into a slightly wider realm, and I don't know if the current remit of that group should stay as it is, or if you feel that it should be expanded a little. So that's all I'm trying to work out in my head.
Look, my memory is a little bit vague, and I'll be honest there, as to what the remit was, and it was quite informal at the time.
Through the chair, I can clarify. The remit was for the affordable housing program that you approved in the last meeting, which was the entire program, and it didn't actually have an end date. The Working Party is to inform the delivery of that affordable housing program, which does include inclusionary zoning. So the Working Party did look at that paper as well.
So I wonder if a restatement of that group or something to that extent might be worthwhile, Chair.
Councillor Bartley, would you like to work with Director of Strategy on maybe there is a B, which is just reinforcing that we're not just signing up to the A here, assuming the A goes through, that there is ongoing work and there is leadership from yourself and Councillor Casey, Councillor Cooper on that. I'm just wondering would you like to just take some time with the Director of Strategy to draft up the B? I'm taking the lead here from Councillor Collins, and I'm sure that the working group is wanting to not just drop their work at this stage. I'm sure they're wanting to take it forward. Thank you.
And just finally, Chair, so I'll take out the other question I was going to ask. Thanks for that clarity. I just wanted to pursue perhaps the answer given to us by Katarina and the question that was asked by Member Henare around. I was going to foreshadow moving option C, but I got in your answer, Katarina, that a lot of that investigatory stuff is being done at the moment. And I'm just wondering if you can confirm that if by going with option A, all of that work will continue anyway, so there's no need for me or for anyone to foreshadow moving option C, because we will continue to investigate direct provision as part of the wider discussion.
So just to clarify, option C is an option council previously moved away from because you can't receive subsidies from government, which makes holding and providing housing very, very difficult and unsustainable. So option B is about more what you already agreed in the status quo, which is partnering with others who often they operate the facilities, but they often have troubles with the capital investment up front for new developments. That's one of the biggest barriers sometimes for community housing providers. And just to let you know, no. So if option A is chosen, we will not be doing any further investigative work on increasing housing stock for elderly outside of what Haumaru and Pānuku are already working together on. So they are looking at financial options and financial sustainability. They will be discussing that with you all during the LTP. And I do understand that Ross Churnside through the long-term plan has also indicated decision-making for you in the status quo on the own your own home scheme. So those are the only things that would continue on in the status quo around increasing housing stock for the elderly.
Thank you, Councillor Collins. Councillor Walker, please.
Just got a question, and I don't know whether this analysis has informed the discussion, but has an analysis been done on the cost of providing housing relative to the council's cost of capital? And the reason I ask that is one of the reasons that we don't invest around cost is because we've got an impact on our debt to revenue ratio. But in this particular instance, it's an asset. The asset generates revenue in respect of rental. I don't know whether that's $200, $300 a week. And obviously, there's a cost of providing the asset. I note in the agenda that it mentions that Kaingaroa is around 650,000. I mean, 2% on that is 13,000 a year. So
I just looked at the chief economist and he said, no, we have not done that.
Just through you, Mr. Chair, it would be useful for us to put that sort of lens over these sorts of discussions because it affects an investment decision.
Thank you. Councillor Watson, please.
Yeah, firstly, just someone mentioned that our unit numbers had gone up by 40, I think was the figure used. Was that over a 1 year period or over several?
So that was over several. It was the Bushart Village. So they finished those 40 units in 2019. I suppose we would say as an indicator of cost for the incremental improvement in the status quo, with the $20 million loan facility that Haumaru has, they were able to provide 40 new units and 527 capital upgrades. So it gives you kind of the indication of, with a $20 million loan, what kind of incremental increases potentially you can see.
Just a pragmatic question, Mr. Chair, and one that takes in, and it goes to the options we're considering. When I look around a number of the parts of Auckland, historically there has been quite a significant provision of housing for the elderly. And if I look in Beach Haven, Birkdale, for instance, there's existing elderly housing stock there. That has obviously been a product of previous councils and councils that were certainly significantly more constrained in terms of ratepayer based and investment opportunities than we are as a super city. So I'd just be curious to know what the model was that enabled that sort of investment in arguably far more constrained environment than exists for us. You know, certainly if you look at the units, you know, they may be 50 years on now, 40, 50 years on, but they're still standing. They've had to be upgraded and all the rest of it, but they're still there. So the short question is, how were they able to do that? What were the particular factors at play back then that enabled that sort of investment that seems to me to be disproportionately more numerous than we've been able to do since?
Is that an area that you can respond on, Kat? I'm not sure whether you're around.
I think I can respond on what's happening with those traditionally across New Zealand at the moment. So as you've said, many councils did that. I think, you know, land potentially was cheaper back then. However, most councils now have been looking at how their housing stock can go to community housing providers or to government. For example, Nelson just sold their housing stock to Kāinga Ora for $20 million, and they will be reinvesting $12 million of that back into affordable housing, but not by holding capital stock of housing. And one of the reasons is because councils can't get the IRRS subsidy, which is the key reason that this council put its stock to a community housing provider. Most councils have had great difficulty, like Kāinga Ora does, maintaining their stock in a good condition for tenants, and also have had troubles operating wraparound services for tenants, and so have gone either sold them to Kāinga Ora or have gone into partnership with community housing providers. It is difficult to financially sustain the wraparound services and the housing stock.
Good question, Councillor Watson. And we, you know, some of the former cities did do well in providing, but being from the former North Shore City Council, I can also acknowledge that we did not maintain those properties. Some of them, when we did an audit, when they came into Auckland Council, were not habitable. And some of them are still closed today while we await the funds to refurb them, to make them worthy of putting people in them. So while we might have provided them, we actually didn't keep our eye on them. And now Hamaru is refurbing a lot of the stock, at least I know of, on the North Shore to make them habitable for people to live in. Mayor Goff, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. These are questions we've talked around. The first point was whether the operation of our housing units for older people through Haumaru is self-funding because of the government subsidy that we became eligible for, and which is why we set up the trust. So are we self-funding on an operational basis?
We can get Pānuku to clarify that, but our understanding is mostly yes, apart from that $20 million loan facility, which is for capital upgrades, and on the proviso that Pānuku has advised Council that it is looking at funding options, including sustainability, with Haumaru to present back to you, which will give a clearer picture about that sustainability into the future.
Thank you. And the other part of the question is just for our information. I'm in favour, of course, of retaining the housing that we own through the trust. But presumably the cost of that is simply the opportunity cost of the capital that we have invested in the housing, 1,452 of them. And can we just get an estimate of what that capital value might be? That's not with a view to recommending selling it. It's just to know precisely what the opportunity cost and what the investment is that we've put into those houses. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Goff. And Member Nāmani, please.
Kia ora. It's just following on, I guess, from Tau and Councillor Collins' comments. What is the issue with further investigating, taking aside the financial, I'm not talking about the money, I'm talking about investigating, partnering with community housing providers, Māori or Pacific housing providers. Why can't that be added to option 1? Because apart from, I guess, staff time, there aren't any financial constraints that I see in further investigating. So my question is, is there an issue with that?
Kat, can you reply to that, please?
So there is not an issue with resourcing the investigation. It wouldn't be done immediately. We would have to come back and scope when we can do it because resources are a little bit tight. Normally, however, when you indicate that you want staff to investigate how to do something, so we're going into the details of implementation, we are talking to potential partners, it is a clear indication that you are mostly more inclined to do option 2 because it becomes an indication to the public that you are seriously looking at how to implement this. And we start to have conversations on that basis, even though it doesn't commit you. So we would assume that if you want option B, that you are, as a committee and council, quite open to looking at increasing that provision and are interested in further detail on how you might do that.
Well, in my view, I don't think it needs to be that complicated. And if there's a ability to at least investigate it and putting all those caveats around it, I just don't know what harm it would do.
Mr. Chair, I'm quite happy as the mover for that to go up as a C.
Okay, I don't have a C at the moment. I don't know what that is at the moment. I need to see words, and can we just check it with the Chief of Strategy and understand what the implications are as well?
Investigate.
I'll go to, let's see, I will go to the Mayor, please.
Yeah, thank you. Just apropos the suggestion made by Leanne, what is it that we would be investigating? Because as I understand, we'd love to do this, but the thing that prevents us doing it is the absence of capital. And if you don't have the capital, what else are you investigating that might stand in the way of doing it? I'm just trying to see the purpose of investigating it.
So the purpose is more difficult if you aren't actually in the position to prefer option 2 over option 1. So we would investigate what a 20% increase target would be, how that might be delivered, what the operational costs with that are, who the potential partners could be given the need is more with Māori and Pacifica, how that interacts with kāinga ora, what the real costs would be, some of the opportunity costs. So it would be down to you're kind of signalling in principle you're open to this, and we're investigating how you might do that, what the real costs will be, both operationally and in a capital sense.
Yeah. I mean, so is there a purpose of doing it if you can't do it?
Yes, that's what was my answer is that if you actually aren't looking to increase your housing stock, why would you ask us to investigate that? That was my answer to Member Ngāmani.
I'm a little bit confused there, so I do need to clear this up, I think because there's a lot of investment here, and I'm sensing Member Ngāmani and Councillor Bartley want to address it as well. So my question to Member Ngāmani, so the words under A, funding and partnerships, now the reference to Haumaru is just an example of one of the partnerships. You're not satisfied that partnership with Māori is addressed or encompassed under partnerships?
The whole intent of me raising it was to say it doesn't hurt to investigate. That I didn't mean it in the respect that the necessary end consequence of that is council needing to front up with money. There are other ways to achieve potentially it. So, that isn't about that. That may be more about collaboration, etc. So, what I don't want is for that not to be explored, for that to be taken off the table as options going forward, as we look at things. That's all. So I'm not... appreciate your guys' view that, I guess, it comes with a potential expectation on the public and funding, but I'm just stating that I just couldn't figure out why we couldn't continue to explore all options.
Look, at the moment, I don't have, a motion that before me that is going to reflect those concerns. Now, if Councillor Bartley and Member Ngamini with the Chief of Strategy want to work something out, but I think the caveat to that is the financial constraint. So if there are words that you think that the committee might embrace, please. Yep, so it could be an amendment. But we haven't seen it yet, and I'm not even suggesting that it's going to be on the table. It's up to the members. I'm just trying to be accommodating here. Okay, let's go to Councillor Cooper. You have the next question, Councillor.
Well, it's not really a question because I've asked all my questions, but so I don't know. We're going to go through the whole talking to it because a lot of the questions seemed like talking to it. So I'm not sure where we're at.
Okay, Councillor Bartley. Finally, I've got you on the question list here.
I think we'll just work out what our C could look like. It really is trying not to limit the scope of what we can ask officers to do. And so that's why I'm siding with Member Ngamini about investigating.
Okay, I need to wrap this question session up because I do need to, and there has been quite a lot of comment been made in the questions as well, but I need to move towards comments. So I'd require the C now, otherwise I'm going to have to just have people speaking to the motions before us, and that would preclude adding a C.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, a C is going up right now.
Are there any other questions before we go to comments? Any other questions before we consider a C? Councillor Collins.
Would you consider if option B went through today and was restated and re-endorsed by this committee, if the discussion at the working party was some form of investigation into how we might increase the provision of housing units for older people, granted your statement that it's already happened through Haumaru's work at the moment, do you possibly conceive some kind of cost being on that bit of work?
So staff, of course, can undertake whatever you resolve us to undertake, and additional direction on the how in terms of the Mayor's question, what would we investigate, could be provided to us through the working party. It is to acknowledge that A and a new C are not mutually exclusive. They can be done together, but you do just have to ask if you aren't really wanting to increase housing stock in terms of a step change increase, or why would you want us to do the work is a legitimate question I'd just put out there.
We could halt the counting.
Thank you. Off you go to the court. I have a question, I think, from Councillor Cashmore.
Yes, so thanks, Kia ora. So we're all in favour of doing what we can for social housing within our means. However, our property owners, Panuku, and they are the people who do the partnering up with the developments. And often, I know that iwi have approached Panuku in the past to join us. So that works will continue, and it'll be up to us and our scope going forward with the reset of Panuku, with the recommendations from the panel. That's about where that lies, where that sits, does it not?
So this paper generally is about your policy intent. So your current status quo policy intent is not to increase the provision of older people housing. It's to incrementally do it within the $20 million revolving loan that Haumaru has and within their capability. If options 2 and 3, the policy intent really is to say, yes, we are now in the business of increasing this. I think Councillor Casey has been asking for a new policy intent that way for some time. So there is a difference. Panuku will implement what you ask them to implement. If you decided that you did want to do a step change and increase older people housing, that's a new policy intent, and it's just therefore instructing the parts of council that implement things about how much and how much money you will provide to them and partners to do that.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Now, we need to get the C up, please. Now, I've got a C, but the question is it by amendment or is it included? I need to check with Councillor Cooper. Is it? That's okay. I think the Chief of Strategy might have just put it to you. I have a C, but I need to check with the you as the second. Is it?
I'll remove my seconding because, as has been outlined, if we, and I do reserve my right to speak.
Yeah. If you could just let me
really,
know.
It's sending our staff on a bunch of work that is already embedded.
All I need to know is, do you want it amendment by addition, or do you want it included, or is it? Okay. Member Henry is the second. Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Now we've got another question, Councillor Fletcher. I'm going to close. I think I need to close the questions off now. I think we've examined this well. Councillor Fletcher.
My question is to Katerina. Thank you for the explanations you've given us thus far. But under the delegations that we actually have of this committee, I have some sympathy with those who want to just explore in a meaningful policy sense what they might choose to do by way of outcomes. That's why we've all put ourselves up for election, presumably. But the implicit assumption to me, and I may be wrong, is this essentially becomes a debate then today about prioritisation. So, for instance, if we wanted to explore additional housing for whichever segment of the community we want, and I actually think that's entirely laudable, we would expect you as officers to then come back to us using the balance sheet in some way of council to say, yep, here's the policy possibility on that, and then you would have to make a choice between this and that in order to have the deliverability. What I'm hearing for you and what I'm wanting to confirm is you are not trying to, as members of the executive of officers of councillors, to deny us the opportunity to exercise our rights to generate policy. What you are saying is that you don't want to exercise that unless there is a willingness by the council to then look at the implementation. Am I quite right in understanding what you're not suppressing debate?
Oh no, of course not. That's not our job to suppress debate. I think you've hit the nail on the head. So you're right, it would be a two-part future decision. So the future decision would be the policy decision about increasing housing, some of those details about how much it would cost, very much an in-principle decision that would, of course, go to, I would presume, the next long-term plan for then prioritising against other priorities financially in terms of the funding. But I suppose staff had made a little bit of assumption in our advice to you that the further down the investigation we go, that you are aware that there is a future decision you need to make that a lot of people will be very, very interested in. And if you, at this stage, are feeling like you don't want to increase housing and you don't want to be presented with that future decision, then it's probably best not to do any further work at this point. That's all I'm saying.
Thank you for that explanation. I reserve my right to speak because I think we mustn't always look at business as usual. We, as somebody who thinks we could be using our balance sheet on council rather differently, there are options that are available to us. So I think it's healthy to at least explore them.
Through the chair, I do note that the addendum on the bottom of C is without any formal commitment to implementation, so it does, for the public, make your intention very clear to be exploratory.
Okay, I've got one more question now, and then I've got 4 speakers. So Councillor Coombe is here, actually. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kia ora koutou. Apologies for lateness in coming to this after a lot of questions have been asked. I just wanted a clarification around my understanding of the partnerships, because what I'm hearing is that the option 2 would be more difficult to implement because of additional funding needed, and it's increasing, but the end result could be increasing housing for seniors. But if I'm reading option 1 correctly, that will also have the ability to increase housing for seniors through partnerships. So I'm trying to understand what the including haumaru housing means, if that including is intended to be very extensive. And I just use as the example Waitai Road on Waiheke, with the local board there trying to progress a partnership. Council, it's been made very clear that council does not have any budget to contribute, but bringing in together iwi, local providers, the local board, council is able to facilitate a partnership that will end up increasing senior housing. So that's what I understand is possible under option 1, or are you saying that that's actually only an option 2 approach?
So I am saying that currently council has no policy intent to increase its participation in housing stock. I believe it's made that clear over time. Apart from Pānuku with haumaru do have this incremental ability baked into the status quo, so it's not a static status quo, it's an increasing status quo, which I think is about 2.5% increase in units per annum. And so option 2 and 3 is about, we've talked about incremental change in housing stock provision versus a step change. So the other 2 options we have presented represent a step change. So a kind of, if you want to have an impact, we've kind of put then probably 20% extra provision on the current wait list, which is 670 older people on the social housing wait list. So we were saying if you want to do something, then have an impact around 20%. That costs around $50 million. Under option 2, you don't have to do the direct delivery. You could partner. If you find a partner with some capital, that $50 million capital investment could be less, although partners often bring the operational costs and they fund those while the other partner funds the capital. So it's the base difference between 1 and 2 and 3 is incremental change versus step change. That's what we've presented.
Okay, thank you. I mean, what I'm trying to get at is under option 1, it doesn't limit the way in which we can undertake partnerships where it might not require council to contribute budget, but we end up with increased housing stock in a good way. That's what I really want to get at, yeah.
Correct. The status, you are doing a lot of flexible partnerships in the current state.
I don't want us to go through a process of, say, Waitai Road, fantastic partnerships, and get to the end of it and say, oh, but council doesn't have a policy to increase senior housing, when actually that's a win-win for everybody.
Okay, thank you, members. I'm going to close off the questions now. I think this has been well examined, and we've got some additional motions there. So my intention would be probably to take the A and B together, and maybe we take the C separately. We'll go into the any further debate contributions now. I know a number of members have made contributions. It has been moved and seconded for some time. If there are additional comments, please, and I'll start with Councillor Newman.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good morning. So, Chair, can I just ask that when C is taken, if my vote can be recorded against on C, and with respect to B, I think that the word direction should be amended to advice, because I'm not sure I'm that enthusiastic about the direction of this. When I first became a councillor 4 years ago, because I've got 10 Haumaru housing villages in our ward, and I asked officers how many of the dwellings were singles, how many were doubles, and of the doubles, how many were occupied by couples and how many were occupied by singles. And they couldn't answer the question. They weren't able to provide, I didn't ask the information of you people, I'm just explaining, I'm looking at you. But, you know, there has been a very real issue in our ward about the state of the existing housing stock, whether the buildings meet current building warrant of fitness standards, and whether there is a pipeline of funding available to address the renewal costs to avoid building obsolescence. So I'm not sure that our existing housing for the elderly stock is decent and secure, which is what the Mayor rightly advocates, decent and secure housing, but I can't guarantee that our existing housing stock meets that standard. And then, of course, in our ward, had the situation over a year ago, Brian McGinty, and I've got the coronal autopsy report. And we had the discussion with Haumaru at the time. In fact, I don't even think that we ever landed the accountability relationship that was first proposed by Councillor Hulse prior to her retirement from council. I remember we had a discussion at the time, it was promised. I don't even think we've got a proper relationship with Haumaru where they're reporting back here to a committee of the whole. Frankly, philosophically, I'm not fixed on the issue of ownership, Chair. I think that the proper ownership model may well sit beyond council, because to me, the issue is how to provide the best quality of housing product to vulnerable people, which is not necessarily the same as owning it. I think that the whole issue around, look, and what I'd say, Councillor Collins, is that with respect to the shared ownership model, that was actually a decision that was entered into in order to unlock the Crown subsidies by way of the tenants' IRSS subsidy from the state, which in turn provides some working capital for Haumaru to be able to move forward on renewing dilapidated buildings, which is why we don't do option 3. But I have to say, as a policy decision, that doesn't reek of compassion. That's trying to organise a policy outcome for the purpose of extracting some state cash, which is different from increasing ownership, I would suggest. So, Chair, I think the debate has been very conflated, and that's regrettable. So I find myself endorsing option 1, but I think that the real issue isn't about increasing housing stock. The real issue should be about whether the council is the right entity to protect these vulnerable people. And finally, Chair, maybe through you, could we get some advice through you as to when we will actually have that accountability relationship with Haumaru, which was discussed over a year ago, but which doesn't seem to have been progressed, or certainly I'm not aware of it. And if you could give us some information about that, I'd be very grateful. But I will be voting against C, and if that can be recorded, if there's no division, I'll have my vote against C recorded, and if there is a division, I'll vote against it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Newman, and Chief Strategy will follow up on that question on your behalf, our behalf, on the representation of Haumaru. Of course, we did see them recently, but I think that most recent representation was more on just the financial position. But we'll do a stock take on that and come back to you. Thank you. Councillor Dalton.
Well, thank you, and Councillor Newman's covered several of my points. I feel very strongly that this should have been an LTP discussion, and I've been calling for it. I've mentioned it several times in our LTP workshops. I haven't seen the policy. Perhaps remiss of me, I should have asked for it. So we're talking about policy. It's not on the agenda. The strategy to hold on to the assets, the Mayor has made clear this morning, that's our strategy. We're not going to sell the assets. This is all information that I need as we move into LTP discussions, because I've talked around what are our priorities. The report says this is core business, so there is a policy somewhere that will give me this information. Is that correct? Is there a policy? I don't know who answers that question around. We're not going to increase our stock. We're going to hold on to the assets. We're happy with the joint venture, and we'll just continue as we are with Haumaru. I'm not convinced on the joint venture. I can see that they're using the IRS for their renewals. I'm aware of the stock out in our area. Some of them are pretty bad, and probably need to be rolled over and rebuilt, but not possible. So my questions that I've asked before around, is that the right model? Are we holding on to that capital? Are we doing the right thing in terms of the provision and extension of the housing stock? So for me, this should have been, and I'm assuming will be, possibly, don't know, an LTP discussion around our priorities. But I think the Mayor's made it clear that we're holding the capital, so that gives us that's a pretty clear direction. Councillor Newman mentioned the Haumaru relationship. We did have that meeting, with Councillor Holst-Led. I've chased it up several times internally since I was elected here, around when do we sit down and have the conversations. I continue to have concerns around the people side of it, so we're sort of clear on who's responsible for the assets and the renewals, but I think the people, if we are going to stay in the business of providing accommodation for older people, then we must care for those older people. We must really step up to that and make sure, because not necessarily, Haumaru have told us before, that's not actually their place. So then it's our place, because we own those assets and we care about our older people. So I will be supporting A and not B and C. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Dalton. Councillor Cooper, your call.
Yeah, thank you. I guess having been around the table at the time that we were looking at this whole way of dealing with our older adult housing, and also I'm going to claim that approach came from Waitakere when we were looking at what to do with Wilshire Village, which was absolutely, we could not look after it. We had not enough money to look after our housing stock, and there's 10 villages, including the Faux and Waitakere ward now, that we have, but we said we can't do this on our own. And our community in a survey said they're okay with paying a little bit, but they didn't want to pay a lot because they were trying to pay their own mortgages because they weren't wealthy themselves. And so the IRS came in, and that was one of the vehicles where we could access money by going into a partnership and look at redeveloping some of the subpar Very old, you know, way back before even 1989 amalgamation type houses, which South Auckland have as well. You know, the old cinder block, horrible cold things. And Wilshire Village was leaking, it was horrible, and our plan was to rebuild. And finally, nearly 10 years later, we managed to do that through Panuku and Haumara Housing. And so for me, we've got a vehicle to do that. And Councillor Casey got that through to actually, in that process, say, well, if we can increase, we will increase in the envelope. So I agree with that. I think that's what we need to do. But the fundamental thing here that I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, that we still have another 500, they've upgraded 500, but some of it's just cosmetic. Some of them will, over time, have to be demolished and rebuilt. And I'm absolutely agree with that. We don't want to decrease the numbers, even though we've got an increasing population and more of those older people will not be able to afford, you know, market rent. So for me, I think we just need to keep going with what we've got. We've got to be able to make sure there is enough money for Panuku Haumaru to rebuild and refurbish meaningfully. And if we start going down the track of, oh, let's build a whole lot more, we will leave behind. We've already got, this is the same narrative, we heard it all yesterday. All our existing infrastructure, or a lot of it, needs work. And we do have to do increase construction and other projects, absolutely critical infrastructure. But we've got, for me, I don't want to get sidetracked. I want to look after what we've got. And so for me, hiving off and getting our staff to do a whole lot of work about increasing and having a policy to go and do all this without any money and leaving behind what we've already got, I can't support that. I want what we've got to be warm, dry, safe, and affordable for people. So that's why I would absolutely support A and B. We need to know what that advice is. It might be on further joint ventures through Panuku. But I think the conversation about caring for people in the homes is a community, is the PACE committee. But also, having run private hospitals myself for older people, it is not council's role. Because once people get to the point where they need physical help, they should not be in our flats. They like to be called tenants. They don't want to be called patients. You know, that's a different level of care. That's not a council role. That's the private hospital and public hospital sector. So I'm not going to step over that line. You know, just like in any home in someone's street, if they're renting, it's not the landlord's role to keep checking on them every day. And that's not, I'm not saying that without compassion. I'm saying if people start to need medical care or nursing care, they shouldn't be in our homes, even if that's as hard as it is for people not to want to leave. But we're not in a joint venture with Haumaru to provide nursing care.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Councillor Fletcher, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that Councillor Dalton has already most eloquently outlined the position I find myself in. I don't want to be, I'm actually really open to having additional housing stock. In fact, the Mayor and I were this time last week at Murray Helberg Village in Linfield, the most exquisite facilities that I would love to feel that every older Kiwi can have access to. But I don't want to be part of something that is simply words. You know, what springs to mind for me, we can do this, but we have to put our money where our mouth is. So it's a question of prioritisation. So to that end, I welcome the fact that we've got councillors and members of the IMSB who are wanting to put things up for debate, but we have to accept with that the ramifications that come with it. Otherwise, it's just words and they're pretty shallow. And right now, on this auspicious day in American politics, I want to see actions. I don't want to see rhetoric.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. And Deputy Mayor, please.
you, Mr. Chair. And just racking my memory, I think it was last month or late the previous month, we had our CCO Oversight Committee, and the Selwyn Foundation in Maru came in and reported to us, and they are undertaking to do that twice a year from now on in to build a better relationship. They're quite keen on that. Some councils are here and somewhere else were online. So I was giving council you an assurance around that. Thanks, Daniel.
Thank you. Good to hear that's an ongoing commitment, and I heard that from them as well. Thank you. Councillor Casey, please.
I don't want to do this, but I will. This will be the first dead rat I swallow, and I'm sure there's going to be a big sack of them in the coming weeks. I am totally supportive of increasing the stock of housing for older people, and we are doing that, albeit slowly. But the C requires money. It does. We can't send our staff to do more work when there's nothing in the bucket to pay for it. And so I'm not going to support that, and I can't even believe I'm saying this, but there goes a dead rat. That's it. We can come back to this at any time after 6 months have passed, so if hopefully the world situation changes, then, you know, I'll be right back there doing the same stuff I've been doing always. But right now, dead rat for me, sorry.
Thank you, Councillor Casey. And Mayor Goff.
Thank you, and acknowledge Cathy Casey, because I know how passionately she believes about that, but she's actually hit the nail on the head. It's not about investigating more. If you're going to do more, it's about having capital to do more. And we've just been through a workshop yesterday where nobody around this table believes that we have the capital to do things that, other than, you know, the critical things that we have to do in terms of water infrastructure, transport infrastructure, community facilities renewals. I'm a passionate believer in social housing, and no more so than for the elderly. If Councillor Mulholland's still on the line, in her ward, which was once covered by my electorate, there is some former Auckland City Council housing called the Glenavon Flats. And I used to door knock them, and they were grungy little bedsits, and I'd go in there and I would see elderly people at the end of their life with no option whatsoever to find any alternative, because they're past the stage where they can work to achieve an alternative, living in conditions really that I regarded as absolutely inadequate for folk in their 70s and 80s. And to pick up a point that's been made by other councillors, and I think Councillor Newman and Councillor Dalton, the capital that we've got needs to be, first of all, to upgrade and make decent the units that we are providing. That's our first obligation. And I am comforted by the fact that in not buying a step change of more houses, we are seeing a change in attitude in government policy that is providing more social housing that is desperately needed. And I absolutely welcome that. So, look, I understand where the movers of C are coming from, and I share passionately their desire to do more, but I really don't want to send our folk at the end of the table away on a futile task of doing more investigation than when every one of us knows that it's not investigation we need to do more in this area, it's cash. We don't need to investigate that, we know that, and we know at the moment, as Cathy Casey has said, we can't do it at the moment. We can increase incrementally, and we should keep doing that, and we're doing it under option 1. So I will be supporting A and B, but I can't support C for that reason. And for those of us that didn't pick up Councillor Fletcher's comments about a momentous day in the United States that aren't following their iPads at the moment, you'll be pleased to, well, I hope you'll be pleased to know that Biden has taken Michigan as well as Wisconsin, and they are 6 votes short of a new era in American politics, and God knows we need it. Thank you.
I'm channeling my Hillary Clinton colours today.
Mayor Goff, you've stolen the thunder of Shane from the Wilmington Post over here. He was supposed to give that report.
I don't need my update now.
And
My apologies, but good news should be shared immediately. Pennsylvania is still being counted to the question from Councillor Walker.
The Wilmington Post reporter must come to lunch then and tell us, because I know Councillor Henderson's been following this and he was going to update us. Anyway, look, we need to wrap this. Stay focused now, members. Look, as chair, I'm going to be supporting the 3 motions before us. I actually don't think we should take the blowtorch right off. I think we need to keep the blowtorch on, and that's what the C does. The gas is turned down a bit, but it does keep the blowtorch going. And we need, it's not just about cash. It's actually about some clever solutions. And if you look at option 2, it's pretty clear that it's not just about cash. There are other ways of addressing this, and there are other tools at our disposal. Now, I imagine that the C is subject to the human resource of our organisation. It is. The organisation is stressed at the moment. So if there is not the resource, that will not be priority work, because I understand that this team has a lot of priority work to attend to. But we can't just walk away from this, and I don't think there's a desire to walk away from this. We need to keep it alive and keep it on the radar and make it a priority. So I, as your chair, I am very much aware that we need to refurbish the existing stock and make it habitable and worthy of living in. And I know I've visited a number of units and they are not worthy of living in. They are now the vacant units because we've actually acknowledged that we should not be putting people into those units. There are a number of property assets that we need to dispose of entirely because they're located in the wrong places. There's one in Handley Crescent in my patch, which is on a street which must have a gradient of at least 6%. Now, it's just in the wrong place. It's not in proximity to public transport, and not in proximity to a local centre, and we will dispose of that and take the capital and rebuild. They are our priorities, but quality and quantity need to be addressed, and I think the C is worthy of supporting to ensure that we keep an eye on both, subject to the resource of our team. So, Councillor Collins. Coming in.
Yeah, sorry, Chair. I just wanted to say that I agree with you. You've taken much of what I wanted to talk about. Look, I understand we're under major constraints at the moment, and I don't say it with any jest in mind that we are challenged financially. We've accepted that as a council. My learned colleague beside me led a wonderful process around the emergency budget where we accepted that we've got major financial constraints. I think we've got to balance this out, as you were saying, Chair, between what is practical and what is immediately before us and what can remain visionary. And visionary for me means one day we might be in the position where we could increase the housing stock for older people. And as you've noted already, Chair, we aren't saying, well, and I hope the staff interpret it this way too, that we're not asking you to go and do this work immediately. We know that it's already packaged in the conversations that you're having at the moment, but we'd like it to sit there on the radar as you continue to think about where we might make some major gains. I came disappointed this morning, not because of the election. The election in America is boring me, to be honest. What was much more exciting was the State of Origin last night. And my team lost. But you saw the way they came back at the end. Those Maroons, they did not give up, eh? And I think this is a bit of a comeback for us. Come back to what our vision is as a council, to provide for Aucklanders, to make this place a place where people feel like they belong, to house people. That's the vision of Auckland. That's why you led that Auckland Plan refresh process, Mr. Chair, because we've got to keep our eye on the vision, not just what's immediately in front of us. Let's not just drop our eyes to what we see in front of us today and what the little we have can get us through today. Yes, we've got to keep that in mind. That's not what we're all here for. We're around this table because we have a vision for this city. We want everyone to feel like they're a part of this city. And there are people who are missing out. Yeah, and I agree, there's some houses, there's some units in my ward that need some major attention. But that's the stuff that's before us immediately that should be attended to now. Let's not lose sight of the fact that this is something we can generate. We can do this work. And I'm hopeful that we look at it. So I'm going to fully support all 3 of the motions. I want this working party to keep on meeting. I'm glad that there's there's been 3 kind of really different perspectives from councillors that's been part of this working party, because that's what we want, good, robust discussion. And I'm not going to address what my good learned friend Dr. Casey said earlier, because maybe that requires a cup of coffee, a good strong coffee, Dr. Casey, as to the position you're taking. And I say that in jest. But I'm really hopeful that we keep our eye on what the futuristic aspirations could be for this city. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Collins. And right of reply, Councillor Bartley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do apologise to councillors that feel like we may have wasted their time by going this way, but I think it was good to have this discussion. For me, it really was, I just supported what Member Ngāmiri raised, exploratory, investigative. I'm really interested in the policy work that can happen around this, and not with the end goal that it's council that provides this extra housing, but that will provide us the intel and the information that we need to advocate in this space and to take that leadership role with central government about how we can get, more provision, because I do see us having a leadership role with central government around how we get this to happen in the community sector. It was Councillor Newman that told me a long time ago that we have a statutory role to advocate for our constituents outside of what people might see as traditional council business. And I see that falling into that bracket. I do support us doing, trying to do more or get more information about how we could do more in this space, especially working with the seniors panel. So I was a little bit worried when, Antonia, you said that we wouldn't be able to work with the seniors panel unless we picked option 2 and option 3, and they are core to this work going forward. So I see this as a compromise to be able to include our advisory panels. I do feel for the groups that have been identified as more affected by this housing situation, being Māori and Pasifika older women, which, I am one of 2 around this table that would fall into that bracket unless I follow my mother's advice for financial security and marry a rich man. So, I guess there's also a little bit of that in this as well, of what we can achieve and look to do with this extra work. So apologies again for this going out longer than it needed to for some councillors. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bartley. We'll put it to the vote. Members, shall I take the A and B together and then take the C separately? Yeah. Good. Okay, we'll take the A and B together on voices. All those in take C by division. All those in favour of A and B, say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. And I have a record. Did I hear a no? Is there a? And can you just, Member Henry? You had an opposing, a dissenting voice on the A and B.
Well, that's what was being voted on, wasn't it? I mean, it would have been better if you had said, okay, all in favour of A, all in favour of.
Okay, well look, we've done it, so we just record it. Thank you.
So I voted no.
I did ask early about putting them together.
No, but you said all those in favour of A and B, and I said no. Please, just carry on.
I will. Now, a division has been requested by Councillor Newman. Oh, Councillor Newman, it's already been passed, but there was a change, and I should have pointed this out, from in the B, from direction to advice, and that's consistent with the resolution PLA 2020-65. Thank you. Now, we'll take a division and ask the Governance Advisor to call the division on the C.
Thank you, members. You are voting on C on screen. Chair Darby.
For.
Councillor Bartley.
For.
Councillor Casey.
No.
Councillor Cashmore.
No.
Councillor Collins.
For.
Councillor Coombe.
Against.
Councillor Cooper.
Against.
Councillor Dalton.
Against.
Councillor Fletcher. Mayor Goff.
Against.
Member Henare.
Aye.
Councillor Henderson. Against. Councillor Hills.
In favour, thank you.
Councillor Mulholland.
For.
Councillor Newman.
Against.
Member Namane.
Aye.
Councillor Sayers.
Against.
Councillor Simpson. Councillor Stewart. Councillor Stewart. Councillor Walker.
Yes.
Councillor Watson.
Yes.
Councillor Young.
Yes.
Could be cliffhanger. Not as momentum. Might have to go.
Just wait a tick. We're still in the vote, so just wait for the advisors to tell us.
That was lost by 10 votes to 11.
The motion was lost 10 votes to 11. So thank you, members. That concludes that item. Thank you to the staff, and thank you to the working group, Councillor Bartley, Casey and Cooper, for your work there. We will take a break for lunch. We will be back at 20 past 1. 20 past 1? So we'll adjourn now and be back at 20 past 1.